The phone rang at the exact moment Cheryl Watkins buzzed in. She was standing at the Family Feud podium on a Monday in June, her hand already moving toward the buzzer for a question about what people keep in their car's glove compartment. And the ringtone, an old gospel song, I Won't Complain, the kind of ringtone a woman keeps because it means something rather than because she forgot to change it, came out of her jacket pocket at full volume in a studio where full volume gospel was not part of the production schedule. The audience laughed. The other family laughed. Steve Harvey looked at Cheryl with the expression of a man who has seen most things and is genuinely enjoying this one. Cheryl looked at her pocket. She looked at Steve. She sighed, I am so sorry. I thought I turned it off. She reached into her pocket to silence it and looked at the screen and stopped moving entirely. Not the freeze of embarrassment. Something else. Something that moved through her face the way weather moves, fast and total, and left something behind that was not embarrassment at all. Steve watched her face change. He stopped smiling. He said in a voice that was no longer about the glove compartment or the buzzer or any of it, Who is it? Cheryl looked up at him. She sighed, in a voice that had come from somewhere much further down than the game show they had been playing 30 seconds ago. It's my mother. She hasn't called me in 3 years. Cheryl Watkins had not spoken to her mother in 3 years, 1 month and 11 days, a span of time she knew with the precision of someone who had been counting it. Not obsessively, but the way you count a thing that has not resolved. The way you know exactly how long it has been since the last time a door was open, because you have been standing outside it ever since. She had been standing in a green room in Atlanta, Georgia, on a Monday morning, going over strategy with her sister Denise and her cousins Lamar and Patrice and Lamar's wife Gwen, running through categories and laughing in the way families laugh when they are nervous and trying not to be. She had her phone in her jacket pocket, silenced, she thought, because she had silenced it in the parking lot and put it in her pocket and told herself that for the next 3 hours she was going to think about nothing except Family Feud. She had been thinking about her mother since she woke up at 4 in the morning. She had been thinking about her mother, with varying degrees of intensity, for 3 years, 1 month, and 11 days. Cheryl was 46 years old. She was a middle school vice principal in Columbia, South Carolina, which meant she spent her professional days mediating conflicts between people who were convinced they were right and finding the thing underneath the conflict that neither of them was saying. She was good at it. She had won an award for it. She had never once been able to apply any of it to the situation with her mother, which she considered either deeply ironic or entirely predictable depending on the day. The situation had begun, or rather had finally broken open, because it had been building for years before the break. At Thanksgiving 3 years ago, when Cheryl had said something at the table that her mother had heard as a criticism and that Cheryl had meant as an observation, and the distinction between those two things had turned out to be the size of a chasm, and they had both stepped back from the edge and stopped speaking entirely. And then days had become weeks, had become months, had become 3 years, 1 month, and 11 days of a silence that had its own weight and shape, and that Cheryl carried with her into every room she walked into, though she had gotten very good at not letting it show. Her daughter Zoe was 8. Zoe had a grandmother she saw at Christmas because Cheryl and her mother maintained, through a careful system of intermediaries and coordinated family events, the appearance of a relationship that no longer existed. Zoe did not fully understand this. She was 8. She understood that Grandma Helen and Mama sometimes didn't talk on the phone, and that there was a feeling in the car on the way to Christmas that she couldn't name but that made her careful about what she said. One night in February, Zoe had been half asleep when Cheryl came in to check on her, and she had said, in the blurry voice of a child between sleeping and waking, "Mama, are you coming home tonight?" Cheryl had said, "I'm right here, baby. I'm home." Zoe had said, in the same blurry voice, still half asleep, "Then why does it feel like you're far away?" Cheryl had sat on the edge of Zoe's bed for a long time after that. She had applied to Family Feud the following week, which had nothing to do with Zoe's question, except that it had everything to do with Zoe's question. She had applied because she needed to do something that was entirely forward-facing. For one day, something that was not the situation with her mother. Something that was just her family, Denise, Lamar, Patrice, Gwen, being loud and competitive, and full of opinions about survey answers in a warm room with good lighting. She had not expected her mother to call. She had not expected anything from her mother except possibly the same calibrated silence that had been her mother's primary communication for 3 years. The audience thought that was the peak. They were wrong. Backstage that morning before the families were called out, Cheryl had done what she always did when she was managing something large. She had made it small enough to carry. She had focused on the categories, on Denise's tendency to overthink, on Lamar's tendency to underthink, on the specific and dependable quality of Patrice's pop culture knowledge. She had been present and organized and quietly in charge, the way she was always present and organized and quietly in charge, which was the way Cheryl Watkins had survived the last 3 years. She had checked her phone one time backstage, not for messages. There were no messages, but from habit. She had silenced it. She had put it in her pocket. She had walked out to the stage. The ringtone was, she would say later, the most shocking sound she had ever heard in her life, including the time a student had set off a fire alarm during a state inspection visit. It was not the volume. It was the song. I Won't Complain had been her mother's ringtone for Cheryl's number for 20 years. She hadn't known it was still the ringtone. I'd assumed her mother had changed it or deleted the contact entirely, and hearing it come out of her own pocket in a television studio meant something she couldn't process fast enough. Steve Harvey was still watching her face. He said, "How long?" She said, "3 years." He said, "Does she know you're here?" Cheryl said, "She watches the show." She looked at the phone in her hand. She must have seen. She stopped. The phone was still ringing. Steve Harvey looked at the phone. He looked at Cheryl. He looked at the 300 people in the audience who were not making a sound. He looked at the producer in the wing, who was looking back at him with the expression of a producer who has learned over many years to recognize the moments when the production is no longer the thing that is happening. A side, pick it up. Cheryl said, "Steve." He said, "Pick it up, Cheryl." She looked at him. She looked at the phone. She looked at Denise, her sister, who was standing 3 feet away with her hand over her mouth and tears already moving, and who nodded once, without saying anything. Cheryl picked up the phone. She sighed. "Mama." The studio fell completely silent, whatever her mother said, and the microphones caught the sound of a voice, but not the words, a voice that was unmistakably the voice of a woman who had been waiting for someone to pick up. Cheryl's face did something that 300 people in that room would describe for the rest of their lives. It did not collapse. It did not break down. It opened the way a face opens when something that has been held closed for a very long time is suddenly not required to stay closed anymore. Her eyes went bright and her jaw went loose, and she made a sound. Not words, just a sound. Low and involuntary. And then she said, "I know, Mama. I know." Steve Harvey took 2 steps back from her and turned away. Not to leave. Who's to give her the only privacy a game show stage could offer, which was the privacy of a man turning his back so that someone could have a moment without being watched by a person in a suit? He stood with his back to the audience for 19 seconds. Hardened television professionals were looking at the floor. The camera operator, who had been closest to Cheryl, had stepped back from his viewfinder. The warm-up comedian, who had been sitting in the wing waiting for a segment break, had pressed himself flat against the wall as though trying to take up less space in a moment that didn't belong to him. A woman in the second row was holding her neighbor's hand, a stranger's hand, without either of them apparently noticing. And then, sighed something no one was prepared for. Denise would tell the story later, on the show's post-air retrospective. In the essay she wrote that was shared 11 million times, at every family gathering for the next 5 years. That, what Cheryl's mother said, loud enough for the microphone closest to Cheryl to catch, was 4 words. She said, "I miss you, baby." Cheryl said, "I'm right here, Mama." Her mother said something else. Cheryl laughed, a real laugh, sudden and unguarded, the laugh of someone who has just been reminded of something they had forgotten they loved. She sighed, "Yes, yes, I know. I know you do." She paused. She said, "Me too." She lowered the phone. She looked at Steve Harvey's back. She said, "Steve." He turned around. His eyes were red. He had his handkerchief in his hand and was not pretending otherwise. Cheryl said, "She wants to talk to you." The audience made a sound. Steve Harvey looked at Cheryl. He looked at the phone she was holding out to him. He walked forward and took it. "Aside, ma'am." He listened. Whatever she said made him close his eyes. He stood with his eyes closed for a moment. Then he said, "Ma'am, I'm going to tell you something and I need you to hear me. Your daughter is standing on this stage and she is extraordinary. She has been extraordinary every minute since she walked in here. And the only thing missing from this picture is you." He paused. "So here's what's going to happen. We're going to finish this show, and then Cheryl is going to call you back from somewhere quieter. And you two are going to talk the way you should have been talking." His voice dropped. "Because I know what it is to let time pass thinking there's more of it. And there isn't always more of it. There is right now. That's what there is." He handed the phone back to Cheryl. She held it to her chest for a moment. He said quietly, "For her, and not for the room. Tell her. Right now. Go." Cheryl looked at the phone. She looked at Steve. She raised the phone back to her ear. She said, "Mama, I love you. I'll call you tonight." She paused. Don't change anything. I'll call you." She listened. She said, "Me too." She lowered the phone. The studio fell completely silent. Steve turned to the audience. He had his handkerchief still in his hand, and he made no move to put it away. He sighed. "Let me tell you something." The room gathered around those words. "Nobody helped me when I was at my lowest. Nobody. I have said that 1,000 times. And what I never say, what I am saying right now, is that part of my lowest was the people I had put distance between myself and because I was ashamed of where I was. Because I thought if they saw me in that car, in that parking lot, eating what I was eating and wearing what I was wearing, they would think less of me." He stopped. "I was wrong. I was so wrong about that, and I lost time being wrong that I will never get back." He looked at Cheryl directly. 3 years is not forever. Tonight's phone call is the start of the rest of it. That's what tonight is." He paused. "And I want everyone watching at home who has a name in their phone they haven't called, a parent, a sibling, a person they love and have let go quiet, to hear that. 3 years is not forever. Tonight is a phone call." He pulled out his own phone. He called his production company's family services coordinator, a position he had created 3 years earlier, specifically to connect contestants who disclosed difficult personal situations with professional counselors and mediators. He said on speaker, "I need a family reunification counselor available for a call tonight in Columbia, South Carolina. 2 parties, 3-year estrangement, both willing. I want someone good. I want it set up before 6 o'clock." The coordinator said, "I'll have someone by 4. Steve said, "Thank you." He hung up. But Steve wasn't done. He looked at the opposing family, the Tran family from Houston. 4 siblings and a mother who had been standing at their podium in complete silence for the last 14 minutes. Every one of them watching with the full attention of people who recognized something. The mother, who was about 65, was crying in a way she was not attempting to manage. Steve looked at her and said gently, "You okay?" She nodded. She said, "I have a daughter I haven't talked to." She stopped. She said, 2 years. Steve looked at her for a long moment. He said, "Call her tonight." She nodded again. Steve announced both families would receive the full prize. He said it simply and moved on, because the prize was not the thing. The Tran family's eldest son crossed the stage and stood next to Denise without saying anything, just stood there. And Denise looked at him, and they both looked at Cheryl, and there was a moment of 3 strangers on a stage understanding something together that they hadn't understood that morning when they walked in. Steve turned to the camera one final time. "Everyone watching at home, I want you to do one thing. Just one. Find the name. You know which name. The one you scroll past. The one you've been meaning to call since whenever. Since the thing at Thanksgiving. Since the fight about whatever the fight was about. Since the silence got comfortable enough that it started feeling like a decision." He stopped. It was never a decision. It was just time passing. And time passing is not the same as a door closing. He looked directly into the lens. "Pick up the phone. Tonight. Not tomorrow. The show is over in 10 minutes. You have tonight." Today, Cheryl Watkins and her mother Helen have dinner together every Sunday evening in Columbia, South Carolina. Not every Sunday without exception. There have been 2 Sundays in 3 years where something came up. But 50 Sundays a year, at 6 o'clock at Helen's kitchen table. with Zoe doing homework in the next room and Denise showing up 40% of the time with food she claims she just happened to make too much of. The counselor Steve's coordinator had set up for the night of the taping worked with both Cheryl and Helen for 4 months. Not because the estrangement was complex, it was. In the way that all estrangements are complex, which is to say it was made of ordinary human things that had been left unnamed for long enough to calcify. The counselor's role, Cheryl said later, was primarily to provide a room where both of them could say the thing underneath the thing without the other one leaving. The thing underneath the thing, it turned out, was the same thing on both sides. They had both been afraid the other one didn't miss them enough to call first. The episode aired 4 weeks after taping. The clip of the phone ringing, the gospel ringtone, Cheryl's face, Steve's 2 steps back, 19 seconds of turned back, had been viewed 52 million times before the broadcast finished. By the end of the week, it had crossed 170 million. By the end of the month, 260 million people had watched a woman's face open on a game show stage when a voice she hadn't heard in 3 years came through a phone she almost silenced. The hashtag number Pick It Up trended in 41 countries for 5 days. It became, in online spaces where people talked about family estrangement and grief and the specific loneliness of loving someone you had stopped speaking to, a kind of shorthand for permission. Permission to call. Permission to be the one who called first. Permission to stop waiting for the other person to move. People posted screenshots of contact names with captions, "I picked it up." The posts ran for months. They are still posted occasionally, years later. The Pickup Foundation was established 8 weeks after the episode aired, funded jointly by Steve Harvey and a coalition of family counseling organizations who had watched the clip and reached out independently within 72 hours of broadcast. Its mission was specific: to provide free, accessible, short-term family mediation and reconciliation counseling to individuals who had experienced significant family estrangement, with a particular focus on removing the financial barrier that prevented people from accessing professional support for what was understood to be a mental health issue with real consequences. In its first year, the foundation funded 1,200 counseling engagements across 44 states. It named its primary outreach program Tonight's Phone Call, after what Steve had said on the stage. 3 months after the taping, the Tran family's mother, the woman who had been crying at the opposing podium who had said 2 years, called her daughter. She had watched the episode 4 times before she did it. She had picked up the phone and put it down twice. The third time she dialed and let it ring. Her daughter picked up on the second ring, which told her something. They talked for 2 hours. The daughter lived in Portland, Oregon. She flew to Houston for Thanksgiving that year. It was the first Thanksgiving in 3 years. She told her mother she had watched the clip 40 times. Her mother said she had watched it 41. A year after the taping, Cheryl spoke at the Pickup Foundation's first annual benefit. She brought Zoe, who was 9 by then, and wore a dress with a Peter Pan collar, and sat in the front row and watched her mother at the podium. Cheryl talked for 7 minutes about the phone ringing in her pocket, and what she had felt when she saw the name on the screen, and what she had almost done before Steve Harvey said pick it up. Seaside, the hardest part of 3 years of silence, was not the absence of her mother. It was the presence of the silence. The way it had taken up space in every room, in every conversation, and every drive to Christmas, with a child in the back seat who felt something she was too young to name. She sighed. My daughter asked me once why it felt like I was far away even when I was in the room. I have thought about that question every day for 2 years. She stopped. The answer was in my phone. It was in the contact I was scrolling past. She looked at the room. Don't scroll past it. 5 years after the taping, the Pickup Foundation has funded over 7,400 counseling engagements across all 50 states, partnered with 32 universities on estrangement research, and produced the most comprehensive study to date on family estrangement in adults over 35. A study cited in mental health policy discussions in 4 countries and used in family therapy training programs in 11. Its headline finding, the one that was quoted most. The average length of family estrangement before attempted reconciliation was 8 years, and the most commonly cited barrier to calling first was not anger, not unresolved grievance, not incompatibility. It was the belief that the other person did not miss them enough to want to call. Almost everyone was wrong about that. Almost everyone on both ends of a silence is waiting for the phone to ring. Zoe Watkins is 13 now. She does her homework on Sunday evenings at her grandmother Helen's kitchen table, while her mother and her grandmother have dinner. She has never asked again why it feels like her mother is far away. She does not need to ask. The phone that rang on the Family Feud stage that Monday in June is still Cheryl's phone. She has upgraded twice since then but kept the same number, the same contact list. Her mother's contact is still there, near the top, because it starts with M for Mama, which is what it has been saved as for 26 years. The ringtone on Mama's contact is still, I won't complain. She has not changed it. She will not change it. In the green room after the taping before the families were released to the parking lot, Zoe, who had been watching on the monitor backstage with Lamar and his wife, I'd run to Cheryl the way children run when they have seen something they don't fully understand but feel in their chest. She had pressed her face against her mother's jacket. Cheryl had held her. Zoe had looked up. She had said, with 8-year-old directness, Are you coming home tonight, Mama? For real? Cheryl had said, Yeah, baby, for real. Zoe had said, And Grandma Helen? Cheryl had looked at the phone still in her hand. She had said, Her too. Soon. She was right. She had been right about that, even before she knew she was going to be. Because the phone had already rung, and she had already picked it up, and the door that had been closed for 3 years, 1 month, and 11 days was open now in the way that a door stays open once someone has finally walked through it. Not perfectly, not without draft, not without the occasional need to check the hinge, but open. Open enough. That is what a phone call can do. If this story about Cheryl's 3 years of silence and the ringtone that ended it moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who has a name in their phone they have been meaning to call. Someone who matters too much to keep scrolling past. Have you ever been on either side of a silence like this? A relationship that went quiet for too long and found its way back? Let us know in the comments. And ring that notification bell for more moments that remind us that the most important call we ever make is the one we almost didn't.